Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Moore and I'm the Programme Lead for the undergraduate degree in Biomedical Science at UWE Bristol. And I'm going to be talking about my 5 tips for getting the basics right. Now, in the higher educational sector and the universities within it, they are enormous organisations. Around the core business of teaching, learning, assessment and the student experience, universities are dealing with tens of thousands of students, dozens of programs, hundreds of modules. And in amongst and around all that are the external partnerships, international programs, franchises, research, governance, quality, estates, building, finance, all the different things about the university business. And so when we're writing strategies for universities, when the public are looking at universities and having certain perceptions, it's my feeling that a lot of the success of those strategies and public perception can only be achieved if we get the basics right. Because if the student experience is that which people are looking at most, the successes of the students both during and after students graduate, it really comes down to the student-facing, on-the-ground basics of teaching, learning, assessment, and the student experience. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is attendance and engagement. Now, we know from documenting years and years that those who attend tend to do better in their assessments. We show this to students. We put up graphs and tables year on year for different modules and units and courses and programs. But they don't tend to believe us. They'd rather find out for themselves. So we need to give students a reason to attend and to engage. And that comes down to teaching delivery, but also how we enable students to learn. Now, we want to be very supportive of our students' learning. If they're unable to attend something, we don't want them to miss out on the experience entirely. And so what we do nowadays with a greater use of digital resources is record and stream, provide pre-reading, post-reading, formative assessments, all kinds of things to, in some cases, compensate for learning that's been missed live in person on campus. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves in this is this always best for the student long term? If we are giving students the ability to choose how they learn, when they learn, or even if they learn sometimes, because a lot of assessments are end of semester or end of year, and therefore the thing that they are moving towards has a fixed time point. And so sometimes they think it's beneficial to only really engage with the learning at the point just before an assessment, because that assessment is the metric that is recorded to prove that they succeeded. And so are we preparing students by providing every resource available to discourage attendance or give an alternative to attendance? Are we always preparing students for a time where they may not have so much choice about how to go about their day? A time when there may be different expectations upon them and they can't choose not to go into work or not to hand in a report. And so it's important to strike a balance between enabling students to learn when they're otherwise unable to, and giving them a reason to disengage or not attend that which we're providing, which, as we have demonstrated and as we often feel, gives them the highest quality. I'm sure everyone will agree that you give your best delivery of a class, however you're doing it, when there are students there to give it to. The second thing is teaching delivery. Now, this is important in a world where we are hearing increasing things about too much broadcast, too much sage on the stage, too much about lectures and how they don't work. Now, in some cases, yeah, this is true. Lectures aren't always the best way to teach. We can't just say that we've done it this way for hundreds of years and therefore it's still great. This is the age of Google. We have access to information a lot more readily, and therefore we need to make our teaching the facilitation of the learning. It's all about how we deliver it. And so in some cases, actually, yeah, lectures can be fantastic, and they are indeed the best way to facilitate knowledge, understanding, application, and taking things further within the context of the field. But we need to be very careful about just doing what we've always known, about doing everything one way. We need to be careful about standardization. Now, this comes from both an academic perspective and an institutional perspective. In order to simplify things, universities can sometimes slip into standardizing the approach of something under the belief that it's the best for the students. But it's not always going to be best for the students depending on the field of study that they're doing. It's not always going to be best for the students if you have all the staff doing things the same way, because the quality of teaching very often comes down to the individual staff member, their capabilities, their passion, their comfort with technology, their comfort with large classes or small tutorial groups, how research involved they are. All those different elements can really change the dynamic of a classroom. So the next one brings us on to administrative processes. I've mentioned standardization. Now, consistency is great. Students are always studying a collection of modules or units within a course or a program. They're not studying single module and nothing else, which means they need to have a degree of consistency in how they access their materials, how they submit their assessments, how they go to campus, and who they engage with. But standardization doesn't always work depending on what it is you're trying to do. Standardization can actually often stifle creativity and innovation. So while consistency is great, administrative processes and administrative support of student-facing endeavours do need to be done in almost a programmatic sense, more bespoke to the course. You need to take into account that different approaches work for different cohorts of students, different types of job role, different fields of study. And so administrative processes can work very well if they take some of the burden of the admin off of the academics, if they give academics the room to move and to be the best that they can be and to really point their talents in the right direction. And this often means having support professional and technical staff working more harmoniously, more synergistically with academics, so that there are always ongoing conversations, so that everyone is involved and everyone knows where everything is going, so that we're all working towards the same benefit, the success of the students. This then brings me on to assessment and feedback. Now, the National Student Survey across the country often gets hit for assessment and feedback. It's always one of the lower scoring marks. We tend to accept it as the one that's going to score least, because students often are disappointed if they don't do as well as they imagined they should do. But sometimes there's a lot of truth in it. Sometimes the qualitative data within the NSS across a whole range of courses talks about not understanding the assessment brief, not having enough feedback, not having enough rationale for why the mark was what it was, not understanding how it was marked, the quality of the feedback, what it tells them about their strengths and weaknesses. There's a whole range of things in there, and we need to take stock of that. We can't keep saying it's a cohort issue or it will get better next year. Every year that we don't change something that isn't working is another year of students that could have benefited or will in some way suffer as a result of not having made a change. And so we need to be more reflective about our assessment and feedback. The other thing, of course, goes to standardization. Essays aren't always the best way to assess. There's not a lot of jobs that involve essays. We need to design our assessments, as a lot of us do say, for learning, not assessments of learning. Our feedback needs to reflect the work that they did to help advise them on how to either do better or do more of what they did well. We need to use marking criteria in order to find where the mark went, but we also need to make it clear to students that the feedback provided was not used to calculate the mark. It is there to help them, and that there are other means by which the mark is derived. We need to get students thinking that their primary concern should be the feedback, how they can improve, not how they did in that moment, because that doesn't really tell them how to do better next time. The focus needs to be the feedback. Now, the assessments themselves need to really go with three things. Authenticity, that it's in some way related to potential jobs they can do in the future in that sector, that it's skills that are transferable and applicable, like communication, presentation, specific types of writing, analysis, design, innovation. We need to be mapping to these areas so that we are assessing things that they can actually use. It needs to be scalable. You can't really do one-to-one vivas in a module of 250 students. You can in one of 30. In a large module, however, you need to think about how you're going to assess so that you can give good quality feedback, so that you can mark it easily to reduce those administrative burdens that we all suffer from, the high marking loads, while providing a quality assessment for the students that not only assesses them of something they've done, but also teaches them something and helps them improve. And it needs to be doable, doability. The students need to be able to figure out how to do it. They need to know what they're doing, not to just put words down on a page and hope that it's right. The final area I wanted to cover is really, to my mind, the most important one, why they're here. They're here to learn. Students aren't buying a degree. They're not getting a degree. They are studying for a degree. Now that involves a big culture change, really, getting students to change how they think about why they're coming to university. It's not a transactional thing where you get a degree and that gets you a job. It's about what you put into it. And so we need to go about making learning less about the assessments, which are just a metric at the end that demonstrates that what you did had some value because you learned from it, proof that you learned. We need to get them thinking less about that and more about what the degree can do for them, the skills that are important to them. So those are my 5 areas that I think are important in getting the basics right, because if we don't get the basics right, and the basics feed into all the big picture stuff, can we be sure that the big picture stuff is actually working? Do we feel assured that the big picture is how we wanted it to look if we can't be supremely confident that we're getting the basics right on the ground? I hope you found that useful. See you again soon.